Yeah, I was born right in the heart of Detroit at Florence Crittenden Hospital, which actually would hear over the years it was for unwed mothers, but it wasn't the case with my mother. They started taking, doing births for everybody and anybody in Detroit. And in later years, now I've looked up, and I think there was a half a dozen of them around the country. I thought it was a one and only in Detroit, and has been torn down in the last few decades totally, the one in Detroit. So we were living on Cottage, right where Dave, all six of us came to as babies. There was a story I always kept hearing that I was barely home as a newborn, and one of the uncles came and almost sat on me on the couch. They weren't accustomed to having another one around besides my brother Dave, and he was, a year and a half plus older than me, and toddler, and they knew where he was, but they weren't accustomed to a newborn laid out somewhere in the house on a chair or a couch, so they claimed I was almost squashed right away. But and then as a toddler, we had lived on a half acre, I think it was 180 by 100 foot lot, and they claimed I was left hanging on the back fence on my diapers for quite a while. I don't think hours or anything, but I was stuck there as probably a 1 year old or 1.5 whenever you start walking and climbing. And started kindergarten at normal age, and school was about 4 or 5 miles from our house, and of the 20-30 in the kindergarten startups, I do remember one boy, never meeting any of them, but maybe Billy Salvala lived across the street. But the rest were, one of them was just trying to get out of the school, and everybody was running after him, and he was screaming, and he didn't want no part of going to school. And I thought that was awful odd, but, witnessed that. And then we'd have air raid drills in the next couple of grades, and we'd go out in the halls and duck near the lockers. Some said we went under the desk, but I don't really remember that part. But they'd have them maybe once a month because World War II had just ended, and they were still. And they'd have the sirens blow once a month in Detroit, all over the city. You could hear them. Even I think it was just in Detroit. I don't know about Southfield, but we were within a half a mile, so we'd hear it start up. Then there were a lot of. I remember the Selfridge Air Force Base. He ended up, I think, dying in service, but a famous pilot of sorts. And I remember them breaking the sound barrier off and going over our house, probably when I was 6, 8 years old. And and now I guess it's not quite legal to be doing that, they claim. So I don't get to hear it, but it's quite a nice noise, I thought. And then my uncle, like my dad was Walter, then there's D3's dad, Wohart, and then Wilbert worked at the tank arsenal in Warren, Michigan. I think it was part of General Motors. And they had a company picnic there one Saturday, and there was hundreds and hundreds of people around this tank plant. And they demonstrated a flamethrower, and they had an actual house. They probably moved it in there like an abandoned 2-story house. And just everybody was watching in a big semicircle. And all of a sudden that tank just threw a flame. It seemed like it was 300 feet or more, 400, and the house just went up in a ball of flame. And that was just really exciting to see as a young child, with one of our uncles inviting us there. So I did bounce around about 5 schools between kindergarten and graduating. And during, I guess the earliest years, Dave had the paper route for our neighborhood and the streets around, and occasionally he had saddlebags on the back, the way I remember, on his bike, pedal bike, and sometimes he'd have me fill in for him and do the route. And I think I don't know if we stuck them in the mailboxes, I guess, or up on their steps. And then my father found out a fellow selling bananas at a produce thing about 2 miles from our house. He must have bought some. He's looking for a young helper to come help at his stand for on Saturdays or whenever he could find a young one to open banana crates and set them out. And the first thing he did was sent me to get a coffee for him about a quarter mile away. I had to walk. No, I guess I had my bike. And I don't know if he gave me a little glass bottle. Let me think. No, he gave me something, I think, to carry it back in. And he told me just order it with cream or without cream. And I totally brought the wrong one back. It was just what he said not to get him. And I felt really bad that I could, first thing I'm doing for him, he sends me off on a mission. I would, like a half a mile bike ride total, and then I messed that up within 30 minutes. I just couldn't believe how I really could be. But I think I was so nervous, and I think that triggers mess ups often, and learning, just young youth and learning. And then we all went caddying. Dave first. We'd walk about a quarter mile to a half mile. You'd be at the clubhouse there in the caddy shack, and I think Dave probably set the pace for all of us to keep. I did it then, and Paul did it. But I remember trying to get, they probably watered those fairways at 4 or 5 in the morning. I never saw them being watered. But all I know is when I got to the caddy shack, no matter how I tried to walk on my heels or toes, feet would usually be slopping wet because we had to go down through a little woodsy area, a stream, and then up onto the fairway. And then another eighth of a mile and across a little river, which had a bridge, and then up to the clubhouse, and then the caddy shack. And the quicker your earliest ones out there were first in, first out, except for they had a few like professional caddies. It was a high-end private golf course. I heard Paul tried to golf it. Well, we'd go there and when nobody was around and sled, toboggan, play hockey. But Paul tried to figure out a way to get to play it finally, maybe 5-10 years ago. And he tried many ways, and he said it just couldn't make it happen. You'd probably have to know a member, and he didn't really know any, but he thought because we caddied, maybe they'd let him out on it. And then in grade school, there was a Pietola from northern Michigan where he still lives. Him and I were chosen to get on buses in the middle of the day and be safeties on the bus, picking up younger grades. And I also thought that was neat, that out of a group of, maybe 2 grades of 4th graders, we'd get to go out for an hour or so on bus route runs, and we'd go out in front of the bus, hold our hands up, and we had a belt we'd put on, a white belt, and the 2 of us would work the bus routes. And then also we ran the Pietola, the Hedemans in our group. We'd always run the record players for when the music class was square dancing. And because we had notes, we wouldn't partake of dancing and such. And then we also ran the movie projectors because we were the technicians, you might say. And I think apparently they could trust us too to be able to do it and not mess up. So the Hedemans and I would do the technical stuff, just normal record players, but we'd sit out if there was music, singing, I never could sing anyways, but I mean, we could involve ourselves with that, but definitely we never went out on the floor, and it was square dancing, I guess, and nothing like, couldn't really see why we couldn't or shouldn't. Not that I ever wanted to at all. You just knew it was bad stuff. But yet they weren't that technical, our parents, that we couldn't be within sight of it. You know what I mean? Which, thinking back, then how do you raise your own children? Do you follow your parents, or do you tell them they can't even be in that part of the school and see it? Or, a lot of things kick in when you get older. Then how do you deal with that? And then another neighbor, friend of mine, his dad had a TV shop on 8 Mile Road, Pastor TV, and we'd go downtown, not downtown, we'd go into Redford as a suburb of Detroit, but it was in Detroit. There's a location like about a mile and a half away. And this Ron Pastor and I would go there on Saturdays and hand out flyers. It was a radio and TV repair shop and sales. And I didn't know if my mom and dad were going to cut that short on me because I knew I could make money, but we didn't discuss it. They knew what I was doing, but they never called me on the carpet for it, which I appreciated. So we had busy sidewalks. We'd just flyers we'd hand out to everybody and anybody as fast as we could as they're going by. Whether they ever got one sale from it, we never heard. But that's what his dad wanted us two to do, so we'd do it. So, and then Burning Lamp, and then came down from northern Michigan when I was probably 9 years old. And he was a sign painter in northern Michigan and worked with doing signage for all the bigger companies in the UP. And he came down to the Michigan State Fair to set up the Keweenaw Peninsula produce booth, and that I helped them on that some as whatever a nine-year-old can do. But they had strawberries, they had some produce with them too, and then a lot of signs up. And then during the day I remember walking off, and there was a fella on a white horse all in cowboy derb getting ready for the upcoming mini-day event. But I remember just drooling over watching him. It's the first time really anybody, a real cowboy I was seeing, which probably really wasn't, but he looked good to me. So I helped Bernie with that, and I thought it's kind of interesting to be at a trade show that young in life. And then Wally and Leonard got into making, they call them bomb shelters or air raid shelters or just tornado shelters. They had all names on them. And they'd set up at that same state fair, but not the exact, it could have been later when Bernie didn't come anymore, but it was in an exhibit building. And I think it was Anderson Tank Company, the way I remember it. They're big fuel tanks, basically. But they'd modify them so they could snug them up near a house and have a hatch to get into it with a vent out in the yard. Or you could have a trap door out in the yard to go down into the bomb shelter. Either way, and then you just keep your stored goods in there or go there quick if tornadoes could come or air raid sirens went off. And so I found it interesting to help them get the booth in those shows and see what kind of literature or design, paper advertising material they'd put around it. But I wouldn't really be there for the working of the show days, but I helped them set up and tear down, which served well in later life, at Vanguard in Somero, I felt. At least you had a little idea of trade shows. And then in 1971, I did the concrete floors for Sepulveda, and 90% of it was all for their own work. And we had one crew of about 8 to 12 men. A lot of them were from Greenville, Frenchmen. Let me go back a few years, yeah. So I graduated in those last years of high school. I'd have a D+ in a couple subjects. But most of it was around B's, B+. Hard. Younger grades, I might have got 6 A's out of eight lines of studies. But as I older and older got, went from A's to B's to C+. Looking back, I just feel schools really blow it by making you sit all day and hardly ever go out except for recess. And luckily I got involved in basketball, being on that team, and track. Dave was in cross country. I loved pole vaulting, and we did it. We had a setup in our backyard. Dave was probably better than me at one point, and until he graduated and we didn't do it anymore. But he did that running event, cross country, whereas I I would mainly do pole vaulting was my thing, but it all started right in our backyard. We worked hard at it, and we had nothing to land up but just grass lawn.
What were some of them early childhood adventures I heard
Well,
about? A raft you guys had?
Oh yeah, on that excavated cellar hole. And Dave remembered it yesterday, which I was glad to hear if I was remembering it right. It ended up about 5-6 logs deep, where it almost rubbed the bottom to keep it afloat, and just kept adding lumber. They got waterlogged. But I often think why that is actually Rouge River that was back in that couple hundred acres behind us. And I don't think Dave or I ever, there was a bridge on Berg Road there just before 8 Mile, 100 feet before. And then it went under 8 Mile, that big triple lane highway each way. It probably would have been a few hundred feet. We could have put the raft out in that river and gone under 8 Mile. Then it would have went into a private golf course down there. But I don't ever remember tubing or even talking about it. However, I remember standing on that bridge on Berg Road, just 8 Mile car traffic right there, and we were throwing rocks in the river, just throw, and Dave hit me twice in the back of the head. Once I didn't like, and then a few minutes later hit me again. I don't know if I stood in the wrong spots or his throwing was that off, but I didn't get hurt. It just hurt, but it didn't. Hopefully, it didn't damage much, But yeah, so being with Dave. Oh yeah, then that other event when I broke my right wrist. Jeff Deacon's dad, Ozzy, he had a lot of nicknames: Zeke, Ozzy, Richard, and Bulldozer. We even called him for a while. Not that he was crude in any ways. I don't know how we threw that on him for a while, in our teenage years. But when we had lived on that cottage gravel road, I'll call them Zeke and or Ozzy and Dave. They had 2 chains. They each had chains they could pull behind their bike. They're about 15 feet long, and they didn't have a third chain for me. And they were going to go round and around the block and do side to side with their bikes and just get that whipping chain to make a lot of dust razor. That's what they were just experimenting with. And they got down to Grandma Nemela's house. Well, it was Deacon's, Lorela's, Salvala's, and my grandma and grandpa's. And they were just about there, just 300, 400 feet from my house. And I decided, well, I'll have fun with these two, and I'll just keep running over them chains while they're going. And I think I got on one chain, and I was on the ground with a broken arm. And to this day, I've never, naturally didn't try it again, but in my mind, I should have been able to just go about, because their chains were whipping about 5 feet apart. And I thought I could jerk one and be on the other. Both my tires would jerk them, and they could get hollering at me if they didn't like me harassing them. But I was down in a flash with that one front tire on the chain, which technically I guess that's the way it'll work. If your wheel gets on another object pulling in a different direction, you're going to go down. Even though in my mind, with my little extra speed on them, it was going to work fine. But so I remember the ride to the hospital in the back of a 52 Chevy, and it's just hurting real bad. So then they put the cast on, and it was a big hump right at the hand of the wrist. And the hospital they put me in was so packed with patients, for some reason they put me in a washroom for the janitor. They rolled a little bed in there, and I think it was about a 6x8 room. And my mom and dad were there. They kept me overnight with a broken arm, which I guess never would they do that anymore. And that was the only real hospital visit I ever had in my life. But the nurses told my mom and dad the next day that, they're wondering how I went. And they said, well, he kept ringing the bell all night. It was one of those little things you click, and I don't recall that, except they told me that apparently I didn't like being in there all alone with nobody around. So I just kept ringing, not probably steady, but apparently I didn't sleep much and just kept trying to get a nurse to come back and make sure I'm okay or something. But that cast did go up the whole arm and up towards the bicep. It was a 90-degree type cast. And then I do remember when they cut it off with the saw, no warning, they just started it up and the blade spinning. And I remember it being quite scary. I couldn't imagine how they could run the blade, that spinning blade, up my arm, but they had a little plate underneath it, I think, that could never really touch your skin. And got it off all right. But then the other thing, the arm, even though it was only on for a week or two maybe, once they took it off, I could not move that arm from that 90 for probably a day or two. And I could not understand that at all, I thought something was more wrong, but somehow it shuts your brain down, I think, or nerves, but then it started working fine, and it's been, fine since. So, but those type of things. Oh yeah, then when I went out for basketball, probably in the 6th grade, I had to go get a physical. So we go to a local doctor, kind of near the school, wasn't our normal doctor. And I remember he had me taking deep breaths, and he started moving, not having TV and everything. We're always in the woods on a lot of stuff, because when he started moving that thing around my chest, I guess he was listening to my heart, but he kept moving it up and down my chest, and I thought, I think I said, you can't get it, you can't hear anything. I thought something was bad wrong with me because he was moving that. I thought, oh, I'm not going to make the team because he can't get a heart or whatever he was checking on me, not realizing the medical thing at all. They don't tell you. They should tell you it sounds, to me, I was kind of terrifying that I'm just not going to make it.
They should have let you try on the yourself.
So you know what they're even doing.
It sounds like to some degree all of you guys really like to learn things hands-on.
Yeah, we didn't want to just be pushed over and not know how things ticked. Yeah, like my dad at church, I was in that custodial room at the hospital, but then my dad's in the Detroit our church, and he held his Sunday school class in the boiler room because there was no more places for the young ones. And my dad told me not to. He saw, I was probably 5 or 6, and he saw me monkeying with the latch. It had one of them lift-up latch where you can put a padlock on. And he said, don't touch that anymore, Jim. He saw I was fiddling with it when he was going to shut the door and have his class start up. And when I had to put my finger in there, and he knew me, I think. So he tried opening the door within 10 seconds and got my finger good, because he lifted that thing and pushed. And I don't know if I think he wanted to make sure that I stopped diddling with things and just go sit in a chair. But that was never me. I always had to fiddle and just always pushing the envelope. And Dave and Paul, they all know it. And my bike, I'd take the chain guards off, all the fenders off, as much weight as I could. I'd just strip it. Yeah, it's just, I don't know why I just couldn't stand like extra weight even. I figured I could go faster without everything. And if you had to put your chain on or off, it'd be faster. However, you'd have to roll up your right hand cuff on your Levi's so you wouldn't get it in the chain. And there was a picture of I think Richard Deakins and Billy Solville and myself, and sure enough, I'm there with my Levi's rolled up on the right leg, just a quick shot somebody took. But so all day you'd go with your one pant leg rolled up because you had to be ready to roll anytime on the bike. And then back to the school then, even in high school, they announced, they came and searched me and another Haydeman out at Sturls. And he ended up being the fire chief of Southfield, which was just right next to that high school we went to. But they needed, at that private golf course, they needed caddies. And neither of us had caddied. We picked up golf balls we'd find, because we lived near it in the river. Hundreds we'd find. They'd float down that river behind our house. And we had pails of them we'd be hitting all the time. baseball bats or one old golf club. But anyways, so they sent us to that fancy private golf course, and they told us to go look for, I'll say, Smith and somebody. They might be out on about hole 4. They didn't have any golf carts back then. The golfer would have to carry it themselves if they couldn't get a caddy, and sometimes they're short, but I mean, they always tried to have caddies. So they'd let us out of school occasionally to go down. That private course was probably so well respected and so wealthy people. They sent us down to come there and caddy, and little did they know, again, knowing nothing about golf at all. We took so it said go find him. He's probably around the 4th, 5th hole, and we didn't know they had flags and numbers and markers, and they said they should be out about that area. Look for, and they gave us the name. So then we were trotting out there, and we hollered, "Mr. Smith," and they were putting right then, okay, and they were waving their hands at us, and we didn't know what they. I thought they wanted us. Now they're waving their hands, but we didn't know to be quiet. That it's a little finesse going on with their putts and scores and all that. And then the next hole, now we're finally got their bags. We're carrying them, and we get up. Now they get them up on the green there, and the golfer looks at me and points. He says, "You want to go get it?" I walked out 3 feet from the pin and picked up his golf ball and brought it to him. I didn't know he meant for me to pull the pin out of the hole so they could. Yeah, so I mean, we were so green, and yet we'd get to go on those special little missions because I think the school trusted us, but they didn't have, Hademans didn't have TV, we didn't, so I think we were really green with. And the other thing, the balls in the river, we were in them rivers all the time with our pants rolled up, getting golf balls or frogs or anything. So whenever a ball went in that river, off in the rough, I was in the water just looking for it, even if it was almost knee deep, and I'd bring it up to them. And later on in life, I finally golfed a little, and I mean, caddies don't go tromping around in a river, but it just seemed like you got to do your best, just do it, and not worry about wet socks or shoes or anything. Just get the ball if you can, see it, and get it. So I thought that, looking back, that was interesting how we were so ignorant of a lot, but we did have that scissor driver that probably looks dumb later to us, but it's still, I think they appreciated our efforts, yeah. And then one of our first cousins in Royal Oak near the Detroit Zoo, I'd go there occasionally on a Saturday, and we would, no, I guess it was even during not a weekday it was, yeah, it was probably in the summer vacation. They were building a 2 or 3 story high school in Royal Oak. His name was Otto, his nickname, the son that was my age. And we would carry a couple of jugs of lemonade, and we'd go up on the 2nd floor of this school that's being built with bar joists up and deck on, concrete floor probably was in, and we'd be there maybe 5-6 hours for the day until we ran out of lemonade. And we had paper cups, and we'd make money selling lemonade, and nobody, I don't think the workers even, and this is a big suburb of Detroit and a big commercial job, and yet we were up on the 2nd floor selling lemonade all day, and the workers all loved it. Nobody ever talked about, no safety or OSHA. So that was interesting how much they would allow. Then at night with the money, the mother would go and get more frozen lemonade, then we'd make some right off in the morning and head out for the day again. And we also sold it on that Plum Hollow golf course, very near our house, 1 block away. At the 18th hole, we'd sit there and sell lemonade. And again, the clubhouse or the golfers, we caught them on probably the dragon hole they were on in the hot summertime, the 18th, and they would buy, I don't know if we had Kool-Aid or lemonade, more likely Kool-Aid thinking back. We didn't have much for extra stuff like regular fresh squeezed lemons or anything like that. So then from there, okay, then when I graduated, we went up to Hancock Convention. And people recently have just asked me, the local boys, men my age or younger ones, and why did so many people come to New Hampshire? You know, the Traffies, the Hanus, the Rainies, just Someros, it's just from all over the country they were coming out here. Well, then I told them how Marty Sepala was my dad's first cousin, and they were growing fast, and they just, at conventions, the word got out they were hiring. So here I graduated, and a couple days later I'm driving up to northern Michigan and drive back home 5 days later, and I pack my car and I'm heading out here, and Dave was already, I think he had finished his Retz electronics school he did that in Detroit, but then he was out here working already too. So then I boarded with him, Walt, Aho, and Dave on Payson Hill Road in Ringe for a few months, where Al Matson had got injured between a bulldozer blade and a ready-mix truck, and he was kind of an invalid then for the next 15, 20 years. That was Marty's sister, Alvina's husband. So we boarded at that house. Then I moved over to Rudy Cullion's, a mile away, and boarded there, and then I would ride to work with him often and work on the same job, just laboring for the first few months, and then finally tending with that 9N tractor with a bucket. I mean, not a bucket. Well, they could put the snout on it for raising bar joists, or a bucket, to lift up mortar maybe about 8 feet in the air, and then the rest was bucketed and handed up, hand over hand, different levels of the scaffold. Then after some weeks, I heard Donald Hill just yesterday. I heard he died. Well, he was one of the better older men, mason. He was a mason, but I remember one day him telling me to go start building a lead at the end. I didn't know if that day would ever come. It might have been a few months. You just tend and block and mix mud. I think that's your life forever, and finally they'll put you on then he put me on the lead the first time I ever laid a block, which I thought was really strange, because I knew a little bit about levels and that, but watching them, it seemed like I adapted pretty quick. And then you'd run the line from corner to corner and we'd all start laying and block, and we were pretty green at it, the Olsons from Upper Michigan. So a lot of those people that have now spread to Texas and Carolinas and Florida, and a few old people went to Florida back then for retirement years, but other than that, I had zero interest ever going to Florida until I finally went. I talked yesterday about pouring concrete. We all just went with the way they just pick up all the laborers, young ones, and not the older ones that got out of doing the hardest of work, but we'd push those Georgia buggies that were all coated with cement, that concrete that was never cleaned out well. So thick steel, heavy, and probably half the time we had to lay 4x8 sheets of plywood to make the runway to get to where we wanted. And then one man on a buggy, and sometimes I think we'd push back on the sand part to get back to the ready-mix truck, and then you'd head in again. And then after a year or two, they finally left the doorway open where the truck's back then, and it changed up the whole quality and quantity of concrete you could do in a day. I would think back then it was maybe 2,000 or 4,000 foot was hardly even that much. Doing it that old way. They'd just be happy to get a few sections done, between the columns, and then let that go, and the next day form up and start pushing buggies again. No power buggies. I mean, they probably had them somewhere in this country, but nobody ever talked about them. Or like a low forklift or a pettibone. Yeah, you just didn't hear about or see such things. And then when I went to Vanguard, let's see, let's say I got married in '63 to Tyke. We lived 6 months in Ashby, second floor of a old farmhouse. And I had learned different things working for Wally for some months before I ever came out here doing fire repair. I did some of that even, I guess, before I graduated, working a little bit for Leonard or Wally. On Saturday, I'm going to jump back on the bomb shelters. Dave and I were given a chore to, not a chore, a chance to make extra money. And we'd drive miles and miles on Saturday hanging flyers about the bomb shelters on mailboxes. And I think I've talked to Dave more recently, and we never heard that anyone ever bought because of that. But I don't know if they might have paid for our gas or paid for some of the expense for the day trying to make it happen, but we weren't in the loop to know if it really was doing anything. So maybe they paid us 50 cents. Well, we made 50 cents an hour working at the grocery stores. And then the union finally made the Jewish owner. It was one of the first major 8 Mile in Southfield, and it was called, I don't remember, the Dixfield. I think the first one was at a road Dix in Southfield, and this was at 8 Mile in Southfield. So all them Hademan boys and Dave and I and Bob Anderson, we all worked there packing groceries. And then it's kind of a Russian roulette thing, but we tried it. We knew the big tippers that might give you a quarter instead of a nickel or dime. So you try to plan with the 5 cashiers to be in that line when he was coming through. But it was, nobody knew except, I think Dave and I and some of us, we didn't talk about it. We all found out there were a few high-end tippers on a Saturday. And we'd try to get into his line. But if there was other lines where people needed bagging, you couldn't stand back and wait. But it was so nice when you got the quarter person occasionally. And then at night we'd go there and visit a produce manager out on 8 Mile. He'd sit there all night so nobody would steal produce along the edge of the building. And we'd 2-3 carloads of us. That was our entertainment, to go talk to a man. When we'd pull up there, he always looked like he was sleeping in his car. But he was maybe awake. But I think we all liked doing something. So I bet there'd be 8 or 10 of us just standing around talking to him for a half hour. Then we'd go get a glass Dairy Queen for the night, or those little 8-cent hamburgers. You could get 8 for $1, I think, 12-cent hamburgers. Yeah, White Towers. I guess there's still a few around. But we'd get a Verner's or a Boston Cooler, and we'd each get like maybe 8 hamburgers even. You get 8 for $1, right? Yeah, I think it was 8 for $1. 8 times 12, 96, yeah. And at Dixfield, some of them first shopping supermarkets, they would be lined up on Saturdays, especially out the door, and they would, like the COVID now, the store would get so packed it would get jammed up inside because the prices were low, like a market basket. So they'd hold people. When one went out, one could come in. And they had to do that at times. So we saw, and then we got that raise. If I mentioned that 50 cents an hour we were making, but then the unions made the owner pay us, I think it was $1.10. Oh, but we had worked there a year or two already, in probably 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade. And all of a sudden we got a raise that high. It was unbelievable. And I think they could have probably, if we'd have known, you probably could have made them pay back money to us, but nobody talked about that at all. So then, where was I? In the concrete out east here.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then come to find out just a few weeks ago, Dave was the one that put Marty Seppel on coming to my house on a Saturday to see if I'd go with Norsa estimating or run Vanguard. And he said he'll check back Monday or Tuesday, and he did. And I told him Norsa, I thought that'd be nice, dozers, excavators, and instead of being in a shop, welding shop and painting, it's just didn't seem that inviting to me, but I got to really like it. And then heading up sales and eventually doing trade shows. And then I came up with different designs on truck racks, which they still probably sell some thousands of them a year. Lynn Ladder, that bought our company. And they're almost identical to the original one that I came up with. Well, the guys at Vanguard were making them, but anybody that needed a ladder rack, they'd leave their truck there for a day and they'd be on it a day or two. And that just bugged me after, because everybody that drove up there wanted it done their way, and poor welders were always measuring and talking, and they could have probably only do one a day if that was, or it'd take 2 days to get one mounted on. So finally I came up with a KD one, 8 nuts and bolts, and you had the rack part over the windshield on, the 2 long sides, and the swing bar was already welded on. So 8 nuts and bolts and 8 holes drilled to the top bed rail that was on the truck, and in 20 minutes you could have someone drive up and it'd be out the door. So I made them for the standard pickups and the shorter pickups, short body, utility trucks that had toolboxes that could mount them with shorter legs on top of those. And they really took off, and David Copenhagen just can't believe how many is still being made at Vanguard, by the hundreds a year. And then for the van, I came out when we wanted to go on the gutters of the vans. And those are still doing real good. And later years, they put in a powder coat paint system, and it wasn't still primed or etched or painted we had a good distributor down in Miami. He finally had to stop buying them from us because they were painted well, but they'd break down after a year or 3, and they'd have them on fleets of phone trucks down there. A lot of them were white trucks because of the hot heat. And I'd go down there on sales calls, and he'd beg me if we can come up with a better paint job of some sort, because it looked like a raccoon was on the roof all night, crapping down each side, just brown rust going down the white trucks. The only way would be to every 6 months they'd have to, and they didn't. So finally those companies started buying them from other brands that maybe would make them, some started making them out of aluminum. Vanguard, I don't know if they're doing it now or not, but they did jump to even stainless. But on the most part, people loved it just the way it was. And I had the bars swing at the tailgates, and it was always attached, so you could move it way out, load in 3 refrigerators, shut the gate, and it was never a head bumper. You could get it out of the way or have it swung off to the side and run all week with it, just putting stuff in and out of the back. And one Frenchman came from up in Vermont, and I think he said he bragged how strong, it was all high carbon steel scaffold that we made scaffold out of, steel tubing, same tubing on the racks as a scaffold. And he said, I think it was either once or a couple times, he rolled a truck, totaled a truck, and he said that was on that truck we rolled. And he was just bragging it up that it's just the best thing he ever bought. He said, I've rolled, damaged, totaled my trucks and everything, and the rack just goes and goes, he says. And they still like them today. I mean, they're all over. Well, I had reps out, and I tried selling all the way out in Seattle when I was out there on summer vacation. That was another thing. When you get married, you're not married, right?
I am.
You are? Oh, good. I guess I forgot that. Who are you married to?
Montana.
Okay.
Formerly Cantaloupe.
Yeah, okay, I'm sorry. Yeah. So we did talk about it. You look so young yet. I just classify you. So what was I going to say? I know. I found out even in the Midwest or Detroit when I made sales calls, if you went into a welding shop, because they had toolboxes and that there, sometimes you'd about get run out of the place because they were proud of their racks they were making, custom, took 2 days to make one maybe. Whereas I convinced them if they put a stack of 8 of them in their storage room there, they'll drive in, you can get them out in 15 minutes, or they'll take it with them. And there were ladder companies in Detroit that didn't have welding, equipment. Well, they bought into that quick. So that was our main customers, lumber yards or ladder companies. Because people are coming there to buy a ladder, and they got to get materials to the jobs, and it really took off nice. And another thing I did was I made sure the layout in the shop for all I made like a big board where the packing area was for the young boys that were putting packages together of the nuts and bolts, and the foam strip to go on top to protect the truck. And I had sample boards of everything that belongs in one box, and plus even a nice storage for all of them so they could stock the work area and go all day and just pack boxes quickly. And then when we sold the Lynn ladder, it's kind of interesting. Some years later, I was no longer then in that part of overseeing the shop, and they found out whoever was working, I think they'd moved things around, and they kind of got rid of that neatly organized setup. Then that owner of Lynn Ladder, the daughter of, asked me one day, Jim, could you go see if, and I did it, but it went from perfect to junk in about 8 years. I was there 22. But then I had to I didn't do it, but I had somebody redo what I had done once to make it happen quick and efficient. Mm-hmm. So that was always my thing around there, to speed things up, and like building those truck racks. If they could only make 2 or 3 a week, one man on it, and now you put them on piecework, and they could just pop out dozens and dozens a day, and then run them through the paint line maybe another day, and just stack them up there, and the forklifts could bring them out to our trucks that were going to different dealers where we were bringing scaffold. And then we did get involved with Hartford Capital Restoration in the late 70s maybe. They completely restored the whole dome, and the statues were life-size up top. They're still around there today, but there were noses missing and fingers missing, and it was a few-year job. And we sold, I've got paperwork from a guy that helped me in marketing, that it was considered one of the largest scaffolds in the United States job. I think it was 5,000 scaffold frames, and I don't know how many miles of plank, because they had to do all the levels. And we sold it to regional scaffold from they were down near the Bronx in New York City, but they did a lot of big work there, and they got that. And they were trying to get the lowest price from us, because it was going to be thousands of frames, we knew. So I finally got the price down, and finally one day they said, he said, I think we were down to about $29 on the walkthrough, and normally at distributor price that bought truckloads, we would sell them maybe at about $35, and we went all the way down to $29. Well, they came back, the two owners, and said, Jim, we really got to get it. It have to be around 25, or so it's not going to work. So I talked with Martin and Bob, and I did the figuring, and said, it's just not worth losing money or breaking even. Why do it? And so within an hour or 3, they called me back. We decided we're going to give it to you, Jim. And I was so happy, because I knew we'd make money then, and we did. So that pricing is everything, not to think, you get a lot of press if you get on this big job. And that's not, you don't know if that's going to work. You might as well have your price right and make money the first go around, and not hope you might someday. And it was and then I heard those two partners, I think I called their office, and they said, once they landed that Hartford job, as a many $million job for them, they said that both of them are off to Hawaii for a week. So, and they left, I think, that next day. So they really wanted to go on the Hawaii trip. I'm just saying that now. They wanted to get that done with get awarded that job. But I think they're still trying to chisel everybody so they'd make more money
Mm-hmm.
in the final end. But we went to our lower price, but not lose money at all. So, and then the stove craze came, or the fuel shortage. I think Dave was talking about yesterday. The only time I saw Marty come to Vanguard, almost in 22 years, when he had finished visitors, he might walk them through once in 2 years. Or when the gas shortage was on, we had a tank out in the yard for our trucks and equipment. He'd show up there with his station wagon and fill up. And when I'd go up to S&A to see about if we should buy more racking for storage, or a electric forklift, or put a little addition on, or Marty go up to his office. I think about 6 times in 6 months he said, "Yeah, do whatever you want, Jim." Or just, "Yeah, that'll be all right. You just do it." But every time it was just in 10 seconds he'd just, "Yeah, just do it." So I felt dumb going up there anymore. So I just started making decisions without asking permission. And years went on, and that's really what ownership likes. They don't want people to be babysitting. I mean, I always wanted him to come down here and talk for a half a day about it. You know what I mean? In my mind, I didn't want to get in trouble. I wanted to make sure it all figured out right. And so it was, we learned as we went along too, or I did. But I mean, the point is, you better learn quick, or they might replace you because you can't make decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And so I found all that very, very helpful.
It was all prepping you for kind of what's to come as
Yeah,
far as
and
this
then-
story goes.
And then finally getting into running those 2 crews for Seplanaho, which kind of flowed into Dave and Paul. Yeah, then they wanted me to go to Vanguard. So then them doing floors, I think S&S did a few for Seplanaho. But they started Larry Salvala and Pudgy Olson up in Alaska. Well, he died up there, but a lot of them were doing floors then. Larry was in charge of what I left. And so then from Vanguard, then I said how Paul, without Dave even knowing, he had D3 and I meet him out in Ohio or Indiana to see if we'd consider leaving our jobs that we were quite content with for life, and join in and put some money in with what they had already in the Somero laser screed. And then sure enough, I found out just yesterday that Dave quit almost immediately, or it sounded like he gave us notice. And then that paper came out from Somero Enterprises, whoever was doing the office work, that D3 and James Somero, I mean, they're joining our company. And I thought, oh boy, now that's getting sent around. So I went down to Hamos Camp there on our property and made a letter of resignation to Lynn Latter in Boston, because they're the ones that actually owned it at that time. But Seplanaho, we settled up, I think it was a few years, 6 years or 5 years before that. But I didn't really like the new connection of not being in full control of Vanguard anymore. So I was kind of real glad to try something else. Like I said, we both remortgaged our houses because they were paid for, and I think I talked to Tyke, and I don't know if we did much talk on it, but I think we felt it's nothing to start over again, even if it's just go rent a little house if we end up, things go south on us. And that's the way she and I felt, and just see how life goes. And as it ended up, it went, even though it was a fast growth, 6 years we were all together, it was, I mean, Dave had it, they all had it hard, Dave and Paul. Paul, he was, what he's like, and Dave, I was surprised how he did international sales so well, Mexico, and had people coming from England, and Caesar from Mexico, and then things up in Canada. but still struggling. Like so many did not want to buy them, even though they got to try them out. Dave had the story about that Canadian one that they had it up there for some weeks, loaning it, like demonstrating, and the guys were all going to quit if the company bought it. Dave, he probably went over that story already. And but then a year went by, they never did buy one. Then they came, that same concrete contractor said, if you don't buy one, my men are all going to quit. I guess they remembered how beautiful days they had with that screed doing all the work. But they were afraid they were going to lose their job if they ever bought the screed. So took them a year to sink into their heads, which you'd think he would have known he could have got by with 4 men instead of 14 and go for it. But because apparently he had the money to buy it, but I think they get in a rut where they don't want to offend people and all that. But owners have to make changes, even if they strip 3/4 of the help away, so be it, through automation. Just do it. You have to do it. And I think that's what's hard for a lot of people, and they end up ruining their own business because they're too good-hearted. They try to remain only friends with all their help. But sometimes you have to make decisions and just go for it, I guess. And then at Vanguard, I was doing those scaffold and truck equipment at the different National Truck Equipment Association. And then when World of Concrete, they started attending, and we started exhibiting truck racks there too. And that's when I ended up being there. So it was real familiar setting up trade shows, and that's what they put me into, watching over the patents and getting the proper literature and videos ready. And it seemed like we were always scrambling, even the last weeks before the show was coming up. With all the changes at literature and new catalogs, you always want to have something new. And we were adding new features, so it ended up, you really needed new material every 6 months or a year, or else you'd be handing out antiquated material.
So basically, throughout your career, you were kind of learning things as you went.
Yeah. Well, that patent thing, for them to be watched, here their patent was named in their Dave and Paul's name. They had the U.S. patent, Canada, and Europe. I don't know what all countries in Europe. And maybe it wasn't the complete screed, but I think it was. I can't remember exactly now. But fortunately, they had on board that original attorney that maybe helped them get their patents. So we ran with him right to the end. And and the first one, I think, was, we caught wind of that contractor that had used our screeds up in Toronto. And then I think they ended up a year or so later making one for themselves, I think, for their own market. I don't know, they just felt, why buy one from the States if you could copy one? And apparently they got a pretty good guy to make one. I think it weighed 4,000 pounds more, and I think they were using it on their work then. But through Caesar in Mexico or somebody, they caught wind from some business owner in Mexico, I think, that maybe the guy in Canada was going to be making one more or shipping it to Mexico. So thought we'd do some detective work, and I'm sure I talked to Dave and decided that, we better dig into it. Either hire lawyers to chase it or private detectives or whatever. But Matthew came with me and decided to go do it as best we could do it. So I went up there. We traveled up there, took a motel for the night, Matthew and I, and found the location of it. Oh, but before we checked in at that first motel, I found the business. It was getting dark. And, it was dark. I went to the motel, probably checked, then went there, back to that business, and I saw them garbage bags, 2 of them out on the sidewalk by the road. And this is from the front side of the building where the screed maybe was going to be being made. So I told Matthew, jump out and throw them in the back seat. I thought, good, we'll bring them to the motel and go through every bit of these garbage bags, see if we can tie anything into material being bought for it or shipping instructions or anything we could get from it. And just then I saw a shadow behind the glass, and I said, get back in. And he jumped back in. We didn't take the bags because I didn't know if he was a security man or a custodian. So I thought, well, we just got out of that deal, or we might have got arrested or what. So we went to the motel, and then the next day we kept sitting out, and there was all kinds of like alleys and industrial buildings on the backside. They had only one overhead door. So we sat out there by the hours in the winter. I put snow on our license plate to cover up New Hampshire on the back, and it was freezing weather. We'd sit out there in the idling car. I think I had binoculars, and I kept watching that door, and that door just wouldn't open. I wanted to see what I could see in the building, if I could see anything of a screed in there. And I bet it was 8 hours later that the door went open finally. Somebody opened it for some reason. It looked like possibly a head of a screed, their make. But I wasn't really, really sure, but it just kind of looked, and then the door went shut quick. And it bugged me that I couldn't study it more. And then another hour or so later, a tractor trailer came, backed up to that dock, and we watched and watched and watched, figuring maybe he is doing a pickup. Maybe it is really a screed there. Maybe it is going to get shipped. And whatever went in that truck, it really went down in the back. So, and I heard it was, I don't know if we knew it then, but it was, I think, 4,000 pounds. Ours was 13,000. I think it was 17,000 pounds. I think that's 13,000. Yeah. Does that sound? That sounds right, I guess, yeah. So it looked like it was a heavy machine that went in. So we thought we're going to follow that truck to Mexico. If we have to, we're going to just get on its tail. And he would, chugging out of the city there, had a hard time getting off at the lights. There was a lot of slow gears and going. And I told Matthew, I don't know, I think it's really in there. And we were debating. He was only like 16 then or something. So we went all the way to Kitchener, Canada. I think it's 80 miles away, 90, few-hour drive. We just followed him and followed him. I stayed way back, pulled into a trucking company, a freight yard, and that made sense. Sometimes they compile them to other trucks or trains or however it was going to get to Mexico, if it's it. So I called Dave from out on this road there and said, I think it's at the trucking terminal. What do we do now? Do you want me to call there, drive in there? I mean, we were just kicking around ideas. I gave him the phone number that was on the truck or the front of the building or something. He said the thing's being shipped like tomorrow. He had all the shipping instructions and when it will arrive in Mexico at the job site. So we caught him red-handed. We had all the details to pass on to the attorney. So Matthew and I went back to that hotel about probably 11:30 at night. And that sleep felt so good because it was like, wow, it really was and it really worked. And I mean, it was just so exciting, even though there's still more work to do, but at least it truly was a screed in that truck. I mean, it's like, how good could that ever be? So we put up for the night and then drove back to New Hampshire the next day. But it was just a neat experience to be doing that. Even though it was a lot of pressure too, and trying to know when it's okay to lie and when it's not, and how far do you dig in people's garbage or sneak around their property and peek in doors, windows. You're good at that too, so it's just.
Yeah, but it's very, very important for a fledgling company to be extremely aggressive protecting their ideas.
And then fast forward another year or two, I found out there's a street owner that either rented them from Somero Enterprise or owned them out in Holland already. we heard they were making one. That was out in the wind, that they were making a smaller version. And sure enough, went to World of Concrete to exhibit, our big exhibit. There's an outdoor booth. There's that Holland-made screed, Perboma, sitting out in the yard. And we talked about, we got to somehow get somebody on that. And I think we all knew this story, which I guess is very true, and I think that we actually saw it happen, but maybe the lawyer got involved too. We found a lawyer in Las Vegas. But we had a sheriff went and served papers to him on the floor, and we had always heard they have to physically, the two of them have to hand or shake their hand. You got to make some personal touch with them, COVID or not. No, I don't know. I'm just bringing that up. And so I hung around outdoors then while others were working the trade show, D3 and D1 and D2 and all the reps. So I just hung around that outdoor Perboma off at a distance, watching and waiting. But we heard Donald Anderson from Grand Rapids probably gave us the name of a lawyer, patent lawyer, attorney in a high-rise building in Vegas. I think it was the 7th floor. I went up there, talked with him, told him what we were up against. There is a copy of our patented machine. Doesn't really look like ours exactly at all, but it's there on the outdoor booth. And so I think they're the ones that probably hired that sheriff to go there. And then I don't know if I went there twice to that in the next day or two to talk to him a little more, or was it that first initial visit? But he told me, I guess they had to serve him the papers, and they got more details. But they found out that I think during the trade show a few days I was finding out more. But they found out I went into Mexico first, and then crossed the border into Texas, up into Vegas. And he says you couldn't be a better thing to have happened, because they have the best attorneys in Texas that will stick up for American patents and everything. He said couldn't have been a better place for them they could have come in other ports, maybe Seattle or Boston, and trucked it to Vegas. But he said it's real good that happened. So some months later, then they got shut down too, the best I know. But back to the Toronto people. I'm going back and forth here, but Toronto, we caught the one that was sent to Mexico. That's totally different than the Holland one. So they agreed in the concrete contractor in Toronto to I think we allowed them to leave that one in Mexico forever, or they had to bring it back to Canada, but they could not ever sell it, something like that, use it for their own work. And I think we could have went for triple damages, plus whatever you want to throw at it. That's a term I think I remember was always being talked about. But Paul, Dave, and we all talked about it, and we said, let's just shut them down and call it goodbye, and just do it that way. Don't try and make extra big money off of them breaking the law. And so they agreed to do that. We allowed them to use their one and only made one, or two, it might have been two, and never make any more, sell any more. And this is that place doing all this detective work. And what was interesting then, I'll say 3 or 6 months later, we get a call from that contractor. I think it was owned by a father and 3 sons. And we were called up there. They wanted to have a meeting about a laser screed, not knowing that any detective work ever went on around there, or how we ever found out through all the ways we did it. But the point is, the person you had a little bit of anger against for breaking the law and trying to get into our company. So now Paul and I are up there. They called us up to their office, and I had a little fear, really, physically going up there. I don't know why. I thought maybe they know too much, and they think we're kind of we were too tough on them. But we sat down in a room this big, beautiful building they were in, that place we were going to take the garbage from, and watching the back door. But their office was, I think, the second floor, a room just like this, table like this. There was either 2 or 3 of the sons and the dad there, and I think they bought 2 screeds that day from us. Yeah. And I think maybe one they wanted in a month. Yeah. Yeah. And so they had no hatred towards us and wanted to work with us from then on.
Wow.
And I thought that was, I think we were all so pleased that we weren't ugly with words or letters or anything from our offices to their people. Because I knew Paul or Dave went up to Toronto, months before, trying to get him to buy a screed. Maybe might have been the one they had up there for a while, then took back to the States, and then they tried to be sneaky and infringe on the patent and probably get into production making them. I'm sure that was their goal, is to start becoming another Somero laser screed, but a Canadian made one. But to think that we could shake hands and they give us a $500,000 order for a couple of them. I mean, to me, that's tremendous. But I think our way we went at it was the best way, to use kindness with law on our side. And that's the way I went for Dave and Paul. I wasn't on the patents at all, but knowing they paid money to make it happen, all that work, I was gung-ho to do I'll call it anything, not physically, but to make that end. But doing it with, I'll say, kindness or wisdom from God, but still, you shouldn't go the other way either, at all. And I think it proved it paid out, which you just can't believe how well it works, knowing how we are day to day. Yeah, it was just such a wonderful feeling to be up there, total at ease, even though I had quick thoughts of, I wonder if something's going to surface out of this, that I'm sleeping at the switch. But it ended up, no, they were just 100% behind us to deal with us and work with us, even though we did what we did. But they knew, like you say, they know they broke the patent law, and they probably felt good straightening that up too, when you think about it. Yeah, they were very Christian-like in all.
You figure they probably had some sleepless, nervous nights.
Yeah, of maybe how we'd go about it, trying to take care of them.
And when they were designing theirs and everything, ripping off yours.
Right. Right.
Leaving them a little uneasy.
Yeah, what's going to happen if they come against us and infringing, and might they sue big money? We're going to lose our whole business? Because if they have a lot of money, the lawyers, they know what they're going after, and they'll try to make a big thing out of it. If there's no money to get, they don't even want to take the case hardly, because people aren't going to throw money at where there is no money. It wasn't all just, from the outside it might look like, because new building going up in Houghton, and big German owner of a building in Jaffrey we bought, Burger Lahr, that was empty, and Paul buying that. I forgot about that. Paul bought it on his own, it sounds like. Dave didn't want to throw more money into more real estate, and yet they remained partners, you know what I mean? And then I guess Paul was, I don't even remember exactly, but it sounded like he was the sole owner. So when we finally sold out the Summit in Dover, he probably, I don't know if they bought, they stayed there a while, so they must have bought the building from Paul then. But that was all his deal, which was fine. And the office I had at, which I thought was something of Paul and Dave, I had an office myself. It was this big as this room. And I felt like I shouldn't be there, that Dave should be in there. But Dave, Dave, we all know Dave. He took a back corner office and just a mediocre. And he was on the road a lot. And then Paul had a similar one somewhere else. And here they put me in this, the biggest, twice as big as their office is. And I thought, how could this be happening to me? I mean, Paul should be here. Dave should be here. Just give me the back closet. You know what I mean? But
So what was your title, if you will? What was your role? Were you in marketing?
vice president of marketing. Yeah, it's not
So you
sales.
had a lot of different shoes to fill,
D3
too.
was sales, and that was marketing. Yeah. And then on the back burner, anything to do with the patents. So I didn't travel much except for trade show times. That's when I'd be on the road, but other than up in Canada, whereas Paul was in D3, we did a lot of
One
moving.
thing I meant to ask Paul, but didn't. Was there a given moment or time or year where you started to say, "Okay, we got this. It's working. We're out of the dark. Like we're not gonna lose the house, if you will. Like things are rolling."
Well, when we started talking to them brokers, just toying around with, and they put packages out to Caterpillar and maybe other forklift companies and companies that wouldn't, John Deere, I don't know if John Deere, but some other companies, you learn that they don't mind some of these big companies to have 4 other companies really owned by the big stockholders or whatever, under whatever, like Dover. They used to be an elevator company. You knew that, I guess, Dover Elevators. And they were probably the biggest in the country. And when they bought us, they own no elevator company anymore. And yet they were named Dover. And I think Dover Elevators still might go on, but that's a different, but they got into acquisitions, Dover did. The part that dealt with us. And, was totally separate from the elevators themselves. They became big and being an acquisition buyer and flipping companies, and that's what they became real good at.
So when you started seeing kind of the figures that they were playing with, as far as what they were evaluating,
Yeah, you really find out
Somero
that potential and based on accountants showing growth in the last 36 months and projected for the next 36 months and values. There was one side of, I think, all of us, why are we even dabbling in trying to sell when everything is now looking like that's just the thing you shouldn't do, reap more. But we went through some downturns in the economy a couple times through it all too, and I think it was just an idea, well, explore it and let's just decide. Doesn't mean we have to go through with any of them. And I was glad. Did Paul read that letter yesterday from Summit that D3 wrote?
did.
Who actually read it?
D3.
He did read it, huh? And
I'm gonna have him read it again. for
okay,
the
and
microphone.
he wrote it.
Mhm.
I think personally himself, and I didn't even know I had it anymore, except they know I'm a saver. Oh, that's one thing I'd like to share was so opposite of where you're at in the technology world. You would not believe how flip phones were a bit much for me, okay? D2 will tell you, sometimes I'd bump it way back, and we were on trade shows, and you'd hear me, I don't know, I just didn't know which button to hit half the time. But prior to all that, when I was at Vanguard, I had all the suites catalogs. Here, Zeppelin was the biggest contractor in New Hampshire. Engineering News Record had them at number 13 in New England and 189, I think, of the top 400. Every year they put out a publication of the top contractors in plumbing, heating, general, concrete. And so I'm down at Vanguard, but because we had so much things we had to buy for welding and metal, and I bought the suites catalogs Uh, and McMaster Carr, I think, was the other name. Yeah, I forgot. I didn't even really. I knew I was forgetting one. They had suites up at the drafting department at Zeppelin-Aho. That was all for building materials. That's the way it went. You need to have, if you want to have history of it and something to review back to if you need to, you'll always have it easily accessible. And I always loved having the history of everything logged and find easily. And that's a little bit why. Oh, there's a box in my garage right now. I was going to ask Dave and Paul and them what they did with theirs. There was 2 big volumes. They're in a box this big of the Dover's buyout. And I think I might have looked at them for 20 minutes once upon a time in 1999. And they've been at my house for over 20 years, out in my garage now, in a box, taped up. And, well, it's kind of being it's so detailed on each one of us in shares and dollars. I just don't like it just hanging out in my office or living room. You know, it's just people look at it that if they know how to read it, they could really misread things and know too much personal stuff, even though it is what it is. But so I don't know where Dave's is, if he's got his at his house, and do they even care? Because I know they had the Masters one set right in Houghton, so that's what made me think it was on the shelf, like in D3's room maybe, or the new guys that were buying us or something, in whoever there was a finance man there. I think I saw those there. They could still, but that's none of our business anymore. If they want to let people all over Houghton and go in their office and look at it to know how it all fell together or fell out in the end.
How was that aspect of it between you? I mean, how many of you were part owners?
4.
Just the 4 of
Yeah.
you? Yeah, so how was that between you? It was very amiable. Everybody, no problems, got along.
Yeah, we did. I mean, there was definite, while looks like it maybe was going to happen, there was moments where I think really, it could be so much better in 12 months or 24. Why don't we just stall it a little bit longer? But nothing happens if you keep going pie in the sky and things go the other way. Then naturally you'd kick yourself to have to go through another recession. So we'd all meet, and we were all good with each other. I think if any one of us, it probably would have got talked about more in depth or longer, if any of us were quick to want to drag it out. But I don't think any of us had that wish or nature or thoughts to start having any issues between any of us.
Yeah, it's a beautiful part.
And there's a family from another church group in Detroit there, 9 brothers. So. But anyways, yeah. It's hard and many other families with brothers have gotten into businesses, and normally it just does not work, whether it's just 2 or you could think more power with 8. It could really divvy out everything and we can really have a good thing going. But hardly, whether they're related or not related, it's just partnerships are very, very difficult. It proves over and over again. It's hardly ever, I would say it's very rare, something like, with that thing that happened here, it's such a extreme thing being put out in the world, designed and trying to market, and not the thing fall apart in a year or 2. We did that thing jump into friction between brothers, so Dave and I at our family reunion 20 years ago, they heard about how we were, and we had our divider line in our bed we slept in this, and it was just kind of a joke as you got older, but I mean, it was like what do they call it, top of Canada, the dew line. There was a line in the bed that was, in the pitch dark, you knew where that line was. And things would happen if you went at 6 inches over, start putting your foot. And so they actually put up in that reunion we had, I think they stood up a bed mattress or a fake one and had the dew line there, and Jim's, Dave, and that there was a battle that could take place if anyone night by night moved the wrong way in the bed and got a little bit too far. Although I often hung one leg off to the floor. I didn't want Dave to think I was on his side of the dew line there at all. But it was all in fun, and I mean, we never had a out and out fist fights over it or nothing, but it was kind of interesting how when brothers are, well, you've had brothers, so you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah, it's
Brothers and bunk beds to add to it.
You had bunk beds? Yeah.
2 on one bed and 1 on the other, so who gets to be on the other?
Oh, yeah. That's the one everybody wanted, huh?
Yeah, be by themselves.
Oh, boy.
And then the 2 together is just guaranteed
Yeah.
fighting.
I guess there was no reason, but it wasn't, people just wouldn't take the extra expense having 2 single beds up in the bedroom. But I mean, it would have been an obvious way as you look at it now, but the whole world operated just packing them in. And yeah. So it worked out well all through childhood, and Paul was 13 years younger than I, so about 14 and a half of Dave. So he was definitely a young lad when we were already moving away from home. Yeah, he was the youngest of us all. Wait. Yeah, he was. Yeah, sometimes I flipped him. He's born in 56. And Beth, let's see, Barb in 48, Beth in 52, and Paul in 56. So he was the young one of the family. So I think he's talked like he don't remember too much of Dave at home almost. It seems odd, but
That's what he was just saying on his episode. He said, I was 4 when Dave left.
Yeah, so that's hard on my head, because it seems like it was being I was older, I remember the whole unit passing through, you might say, life, yeah. Yeah, the fact Elmer Lima taught Kenny Hendrickson for the Southfield Church, when Finnish visitors would come in the Detroit area, they'd sometimes put Dave and I to tour them around Detroit for the day on a Saturday perhaps, or any day of the week if we weren't working in the summertime when we weren't in school. So we would actually take people for hours, and we didn't know one word of Finnish really. And but that was good experience too, just some young fellers they'd just say, no, I can't do it. But we would do things like that, and well, then we went to the air show. But that was all good learning skills you can gain from that kind of awkward settings, I guess. But we went to that air show with my dad in a 50 Ford 4-door, and we were coming back. Karen was in the car, and myself and Dave was in the front seat, passenger side, my dad driving. I don't think Dave even had a license yet. 1950, he wouldn't have had it. He was only 10 years old. And we were on a dirt road intersection, maybe 5 miles from watching the air show. Nice day watching all that happen. And my dad stopped where he was supposed to stop, then took off, but a car came over a knoll, and I was interested in saying I had never heard of a knoll in my life till that day, and then I heard about a knoll. Everybody talked about that accident for months. Well, a car came over a knoll with 2 guys in it driving extremely fast, and they broadsided us, and Dave The farmer in the field saw our car flip 3 times in the air, rolled. And Dave flew out in the ditch, and the car rolled over Dave in the ditch. And Karen and I were in the back seat rolling around. They all had a toolbox. My dad did carpentry. No power tools, but all the hand saws, chisels, hammers, everything in a wood toolbox, he always kept in the back seat. So we rolled around. The car was on his roof when we ended. And ambulance came, took Dave off. He ended up with, I think, punctured lung or something at a hospital. And Karen and I didn't even go get checked. We were just scraped up a little. I think my dad had some bumps, and they might have checked him at the hospital. But, when the car was on its roof, and the tools were all over in dust, all I remember is I kept telling Karen, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry, Karen, don't cry, don't cry, we'll be all right, don't cry. And she never did, as far as I know. And I thought everything would be fine. That's how I reacted to an accident. If you don't cry, it can never be nothing bad. So I convinced her, and I don't think I cried. Dave was kind of half knocked out when the ambulance came. So, and then we went to the hospital. Our car was total or gone, so Lauka had to come pick us up, brought us home, and I didn't hardly have anything wrong with me, Karen. I went to bed that night, and in the morning my neck was so stiff, sore, but I never went to the doctors. But I was hurt, but didn't know it. Yeah, I probably had whiplash. But say it happened at 4 in the afternoon, I was good for the next 12, 20 hours before it kicked in. Any sign of pain. I think adrenaline just doesn't allow you to feel anything, apparently, at times, yeah. So that was quite a happening with our family, really. It could have been the end of all of us. Dave, Karen, and I, and my dad. But yeah, he kept talking about Noel whenever he explained, and finally found out.
That wasn't the only accident Dave was involved in. Can you tell the airplane crash story? Just because now we have cameras.
Yeah. Yeah, we were at.
Or did I video that?
I thought you did. Yeah.
I did video.
We had
that.
the
So
same.
we're good with that.
Okay. We were at the same trade show, and I decided because they were there for the World of Concrete, and I was there for the truck racks. So I thought, why don't I just go home? Because I wasn't into the concrete field at that time at all. So I just took off the night before and got home, and then taking the wives down to meet them at that. My mom and dad, I think, went away for their anniversary. I don't know what year it was, 20th, 25th, or whatever it would have been. And Wally and Elna came to watch us, the ones that were born at that time. And Dave was driving. I don't think I even had a license then, so Dave must have been at least 16, 17. And it was the 55 Ford. And Bill Nemi had, I think, a 53 Ford. And they did a lot, worked at Dixfield together, and evenings they're able to go to a hamburger, or Dairy Queen, or that Hamburg stand that makes 12 for $1. Well, if I said it earlier, but can't think of the name of it right now. White Castle hamburgers, hot dog hamburgers, yeah. So that was our typical thing to run to, just get some little treat. Other than that, was just ride around the roads a little and call it a night. But Wally and Elna were watching everybody back at the house, and Dave must have been off with his friend Bill Nemi, the 2 cars, or maybe they left one at the house, which should often be the case. And I went up to sleep about 10:30, the way I remember. And then Dave came upstairs and said, Jim, he woke me up. He said, I wrecked the car. And I couldn't believe. And I said, where? He says, front of the house. And nothing made sense how you'd wreck a car out in the yard, on the road. Well, but it was, the best I know, Dave could clarify it for sure, but I think they're both driving without any lights around and around them streets, playing hide and seek. I think they had lights on at times on their cars, but then they'd park to the side, and then they'd try to drive probably certain amounts with no lights so they can get in a good hiding spot on the edge of the road and keep getting away from each other. So they got turned around, so maybe they were actually going against each other, maybe they hadn't up to that point. But unbeknown, one of them did turn around, so as one's trying to find the back bumper of the other guy, they were actually coming at each other right in front of our house. And last minute, it would have been, I think they're both in the middle of the road, but they both swerved, but they wiped out the hood, grill, bumpers, front wheel, and wheel well. And both of them had to be towed off to get to a body shop, and they did get them both fixed. But Wally got involved, and he probably went out there, and was already in the ditch, or near the ditch in the front of he probably towed it in the yard a little more, or had a wrecker pick it up. And somehow Wally he always made everything happen quick and easy. It made it look, but I think within 3, 4, or 5 days, that car was home looking like a brand new 55 Ford. All the parts were replaced. I think they might have even painted the whole car, or it sure looked like it, or polished what didn't need replacing. And my mother and dad must have had the second car at that time, so they didn't have their regular family car that Dave was often using. But to think he could total a car and purposely playing a game like that in the dark with no lights on, I think that's why yesterday when we were meeting, he didn't seem to want to talk too more on that subject, but it was good. But it all turned out good. I thought it was extra nice to see. My dad bought that Ford a couple, 3 years before, brand new, and now it looked like it came out of the showroom again. It just felt so good to have a shiny, complete car in the yard. And so it was a good end. Nothing ever came of it between the friendship with Bill and Amy or Dave. It was just full-blown accident. Yeah.
Yeah, antics of youth.
Yes. And we wonder, can't look too hard at young ones ever, huh?
So you and big brother, little brother, but you're so close in age. Are you just a year apart?
Year and a half, yeah.
So if he's turning 80, then are you 78?
78, and let's see, end of May, June, July, August. Yeah, I think it's about a year and 6 months apart, roughly.
Gotcha.
But what's interesting in the last 5-10 years, total surprise, I would like to say 10 to 20 to 30 people, they'll ask me who's older. And I mean, all my life I knew he was 20 years older than me. I was just a young guy, and he's an old man. I mean, even when I'm 18 and he's 20, you always figure somebody if they're 2 years older than you, how would you not know who's older? I was sure I always looked younger than Dave, but truth hurts, they say sometimes.
So after Somero sold them, were you retired then?
Yes. Let's see, I went into trying to do something with our home, get it more updated. Arlen Company, Matt Traffy, had already put all new Anderson windows in the original house built in 1778. And then I was living there about a year when we first moved there, and Brother Dave and Walt Howe came and put in a full-blown heating system, which ours was so designed for the old farmhouse. Mainly the wood stove kept us warm. And when the motor went out on a blower in the basement of a little bitty furnace, which poked a few ducts up in the first floor only, and the holes in the ceilings to heat the upper rooms. I went to Fitchburg to get the new motor because it burnt out. And the man at the counter picked it up. He said, "Oh, this is out of a house trailer. Here's a 10-room farmhouse." And he thought it came from a house trailer, little forced air heater. So anyways, because of all of that, needing a heating system, had original siding, original windows, and it was just pretty tough shape. But Arlen did that all over, probably 5 years before sold Somero. But I went on and I was looking to maybe get a sauna indoors and a garage, and then a living room and a warm basement. And we, I don't know what the addition is, let's say 4,000 foot addition. And it's worked real well, radiant heat and AC and drive-in garage, and it's just been a wonderful place to live for the last 20 years. However, that same year we sold, within a few weeks, Tyke would always, and we would look at the Sunday's Child. If we bought a Boston Globe, they always featured siblings or normally just one child up to be adopted, up for free for adoption. So we tried doing respite care back in Detroit days when we were renting our first house ever. Well, one we rented in Ashby for a few months. Then Wally Niemela called me, told me he had a new pickup ready for me, even though I was working for Steppler Aho. So 6 months later, I moved to Detroit and worked with him for a spell, 6 years actually. We moved there, and I forgot where I was at.
Kind of several places at once. Adoption.
Oh, okay. I was going to go on to the adoption. Yeah. So that addition we started the addition, and then about the same time we read about them children, brother and sister, 9 and 12, up in Maine. So we went up to. We started taking back in Detroit. Yeah, they wouldn't let us. There was an article about a mother in some orphanage trying to take care of about 10, 15 toddlers. But anyways, they came and measured the house we were renting, and the bedroom wasn't big enough. And all we had was Julie at that time, one baby, and they wouldn't let us take one or two. No, the rental we had was too small. So years later now, we reading about children for adoption. Well, we checked in and we thought, well, let's take a course this summer. We'll have time, and maybe we'll start taking foster kids in. And then also we put the addition on. And anyways, it led to taking that many-week class, and we got approved, and then we saw that 2 children in the paper up in Maine. So that few months, about within 90 days of that, they were living with us. And then they needed 9 months, minimum 6 months to live with us before it could go to the court, which we did in the Gardner courtroom. And the boy is now Jason, but his name was David. And we thought it'd forever be, but one day he just told Tyke wants to name Jason. And I think she kind of asked, "Oh, really?" Yeah. And she thought, well, if you decide by adoption time or the court order time, that'd be an ideal time to officially change it. And she said, well, that would be good. Jason Owen Somero. And he said, well, I think he said right then that he didn't even want his middle name, but that got dropped. But anyways, it was going to be, he wanted Jason. And then Starr heard about it and said, you can't be Jason. You've been David all your life. And he very nicely, now these kids are both operating years younger, really, because of their childhood and schooling and such. And she says, he said, you can call me David, but you're the only one. But she did switch over after he was officially named. And then what was most interesting, I was reading Pilgrim's Progress to him up and putting him to bed at night. And here we were going to Ashburnham Church. New Ipswich. Paul was in Ashburnham. But he loved Paul. Paul would help, do a little. But he wanted to go to the Sunday school program in Ashburnham. And Paul gave him a Pilgrim's Progress book, the way I remember it. More of a child's or adult edition. Not quite adult, but not real childish either. I think that's the way it worked. So anyways, I started reading that book to him every night, probably just a page or two. And I do remember that first page in Pilgrim's Progress, even though I'd read it to our other children, I didn't realize, like, the family got separated and he left the mother and father, and I don't just remember how it played. And here I'm reading it, and it's almost like now I'm feeling like he is, or I'm that, like the parting of the path to the celestial city and the difficulties of childhood. But anyways, he didn't flinch when I was reading what I was reading, but I didn't expect that. But back to the name, I don't know if it was that night when he said he wants to be Jason, or was it a couple nights later. I was reading to him, and it might have been that first night. He says, "What's your middle name?" He asked out of the blue when I'm reading that Pilgrim's Progress. I said, "Michael." And he said, "Well, that's what I want to be, so I can be a part of you." And like Taiki and I know, he was a 9-year-old like a 5-year-old. And we think those were God moments for us and him. And what really nailed that happening was maybe a week or two later, putting him to bed again, or was it just down in the kitchen? He said, "Oh, what is your middle name again?" "Oh, yeah, here he said, well, that's what I want to be, so I can be a part of you." And a week later, he didn't even know what it was that he wanted, the name. So he didn't care what it was, basically. So in the courtroom, that's what he changed it to Jason Michael Somero, 9 months after we had him at our house. And then Star took her a few weeks or a month or two to finally drop. It was no more David, it was Jason. Yeah. Now they each have, I think, 6 children, and life goes on. So, and one other neat thing with Jason was he wanted to show me how he could do a jump off a homemade ramp he made out on the paved driveway. And so I went out on the deck to watch. Arlen had made a new deck for us, and I went out in front of the old house, and he had it all set up, and he found me. I didn't mind they rode bikes hard, but I didn't know he was going to be doing jumps. He was a little chunky and heavy, and some of the Copeland cousins in New Ipswich here. So the first time he was pumping hard down the driveway, and he crashed. He crashed pretty hard. Didn't break a bone or bleed much. But the point I'm getting at, he ran about 60 feet to me and just came arms around me. Which I had never done before, but it was kind of a special moment.
Yeah, you saw the instinctive reaction
Yeah.
was that you are
Yeah,
safety and comfort.
right.
And you're not going to be ashamed of him
Right.
crashing
Yeah,
and things.
yeah,
That's really special.
yeah. Sometimes I hate to even tell it because it seems so, in all the busyness of children around, grandchildren, your own children. But that was a different sensation. Not that our own ones had done it already from the time they were 1, the 2, the 4, you know what I mean? Now he's a 10-year-old boy almost, and now it happens. It was probably that, yeah, because they came the end of August, and I don't think he was up to pedal on the bike hard, in September, October. So I think it was the next spring when this happened, or summer, So he was probably 10 years old. So he was a young-minded big boy with a lot of push to him, but he didn't like doing stuff around the house with me so long. He was always just wipe him out in 20 minutes. He's always tired. I got to go in for a while, you know. We put up with it, and now he's running a crew for S&S, I guess. So it's amazing, really.
Wow, yeah.
And he struggled in school with, and reading a book to him on the couch instead of Pilgrim's Progress. It was real children's book, simplest of words. And now he's like 10 years old, but we bonded there nicely too. Not that I even thought to do it, but reading these short sentences in the children's book, he'd always go about 1 or 4 words, and then he couldn't read a 5-letter word. He'd say what, and I'd fill it in. He'd say it page by page. In a 20-page book, he might have said 60 whats, but that's the way he taught me how to teach him, basically. He didn't know it, and I didn't know it, but it just worked so good. And he's become a good reader, really, starting out that late in life. Whereas I know some of our nieces, they're 3 and 4 years old, 5, and they're fluent readers,
amazing.
yeah. And here he's 10 and just still whatting on the most basic books. So that was 20 years ago when all that was happening, yeah. Some weeks or months before, Arnold Seppala and Marty Seplik, being the first cousin of my father, blew into Detroit one day driving, and Marty had a check with him to buy Dave a brand new Falcon and Arnold. Went to a Ford dealership. I'll say in 2 hours, Marty wrote him, I always think it was $1,300 each car, but it might have been $1,800. Check for, he wrote it out, I think it was $3,600, handed it to the guy. Arnold and Dave drive off with 2 brand new Falcons. A little surprising, they were 4-doors. No young kid would buy a 4-door then, but Dave, I think, was kind of frugal, and it was probably the best bang for the buck, you know. So within 2 hours, we were racing. They're identical cars, stick shift, 6-cylinder, and we're about a mile from our house on Berg Road. Again, gravel road where I broke my arm, but a different road, but doing a drag strip right in the residential area. It's a little wider road than the cottage we were on, but it's just house after house. So now we're both peeling off, and it was, I think it was nighttime actually. And one of them, I don't know if Dave or Arnold beat the other by a car length, but they put a rock through the other guy's headlight, blew out his headlight. So, I mean, they had known them 8 hours, and they were speeding, out racing, and one got ahead of the other. I don't know who put whose headlight out. But, so Dave he had it in him. He wasn't all only everything, you know how he is, so thorough and precise and makes things happen, but he
He wasn't always thoughtful.
he liked having fun.